following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back talking vintage sports in the zone. I'm Ralph Tycho. I'll be filling in for Alan Blumkin, who's not here, but 3 of the 4 regulars are, and David Hubler is here. Hello, David.
Good evening. Good evening. Hope everyone's well.
We are, as far as I know. George Case III.
I'm here, too, and I'm well right now. The doggone virus is spreading all over the place, but so far, Philadelphia's okay.
Yes, don't breathe in, but the risk of not breathing in is...
not a good alternative, Ralph.
Right. Well, it's an idea. I ran it up the flagpole to see if no one thought of that before. I'm an idea man. Our guest of honor tonight, only because he's the only person I know on this panel who is employed by an actual hockey team, and that team being the Rangers. I wanted to talk Montreal Canadian hockey because of the death this week of the pocket rocket Henri Richard. Halbach, what was it like working for the Rangers when the Montreal Canadiens came in?
It was very unpleasant, believe me, because you knew that that was a powerhouse team. They had the best players in the league every year, and it was a team that you recognized the same players all the time. Jean Beliveau, Maurice Richard, Boomer Geoffrion, and on and on and on. And in that cast of characters, after Rocket was around for a while, his little brother came along, Henri Richard, the pocket rocket. And he was a terrific player, terrific center, very good playmaker. And he knew his way around the ice. He knew where to go and where to be. And unfortunately, we lost him this week at age 84. It's a sad thing to keep talking about athletes that you remember and thought were so terrific, talking about their passing. We did that last week with Johnny Antonelli. The Pocket Rocket he was a terrific hockey player. He skidded around the ice. He was like a firefly running around the ice, and he was a lot different than his brother. Maurice Richard was just power on ice. I remember Glenn Hall had a famous quote which I used more than once. He said when the rocket came down the ice, his eyes would light up and they would be like neon, blinking in the lights, and it was almost like a pinball machine flashing at you as he came down, preparing to shoot at you. That was the Rocket. He was an unbelievably strong player, 544 career goals. His little brother, Henri, the Pocket Rocket, was a lot different. He was not that kind of a powerful presence on the ice, but he was always in the right place at the right time. He had terrific puck sense. We called it puck sense in those days, knowing where to be and how the puck seemed to find him all the time. And this is a guy who was on a record 11 Stanley Cup championship teams. Now, there are players in the NHL who go through an entire career and never win a Stanley Cup. This guy won 11 Stanley Cups. That's a record. He scored 358 goals in his career, which is a pretty good total. A lot of players don't score 300 goals. He had 358 goals. He was a 4-time All-Star and just a terrific all-around player. He's a Hall of Famer. And sadly came to a conclusion. His life came to a conclusion this week. He had been suffering from Alzheimer's disease, I understand. I heard that the other day. And that's a sad way to go out. But he had a great career, and he left his mark on hockey. He's in the Hall of Fame. And it's interesting because when you talked about hockey in those days, and you mentioned Richard, it was always the Rocket, Maurice Richard. But the Pocket Rocket was darn good too, and he earned his place in hockey history, and he'll be missed. A terrific player. So I'll leave it to.
I was going to ask you if I remember correctly. He was still on the Canadiens after Maurice left. Was that correct?
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay.
Several years. He played for several years after the Rocket retired.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the difference in age, but I do know that he was on the team for several years after Maurice retired.
And then there was the Vest Pocket Rocket too, if you recall.
Who was the Vest Pocket Rocket?
That was the youngest brother, I believe.
Another brother? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what, David? I just looked it up after you mentioned that because I wasn't familiar with him at all. And apparently he was the third brother in a very similar situation like with the DiMaggios. You know, everybody knows Joe and Dom, but, you know, not too many people knew Vince. On the other hand, everybody knew, you know, Rocket and Pocket Rocket, but all of a sudden now you've got the Vest Pocket Rocket, which is the youngest brother, who, from what I read, and David and Hal, you might know a lot more of it than I do, he was not nearly as talented as the other two.
What was his name?
His name was. I've got it here. Let me see what it is.
Yeah, I don't remember. All I knew was Vest Pocket. Yeah, and Richard.
Yeah.
I thought when you mentioned that in an email, I thought you were kidding.
No.
I responded by mentioning my nickname, which is Empty Pockets Schlemiel.
Okay.
So,
I do have a name. His name was Claude.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
That's a new one on me. I had never heard of him.
Wow, I can't believe you didn't know that. I didn't know that.
I didn't either. Not that I'm as great a hockey fan as you, certainly, Mr. Bach, but I went up, Geo-Pass in hand, to the third balcony.
Yep.
And raced up there to get the best seats.
Right. Oh God! Every Sunday evening. That was the evening's entertainment for so many of us.
Yes.
Especially when the Canadiens came in. No other team drew that kind of emotion from the crowd, especially up in the third deck. I mean, this was like the Yankees coming into St. Louis and playing the Browns.
Well, you know, Ralph mentioned that I worked for the Rangers. That was my first job out of college.
Mm-hmm.
And we had our office in Madison Square Garden. It was adjacent to the arena. And we had a door. I think I may have told this story before on the show, but we had a door that led from our office literally into the arena, into the balcony of or the mezzanine of the arena. And before the game would start at 7:00 or 7:30, and there would be time to go to the press box. And I'd open the door and walk out, and I'd look down on the ice, and I'd see the Canadians warming up. And there was Beliveau, number 4, and Boomer Geoffrion, number 5, and Jacques Plante standing in goal, number 1. And the Pocket Rocket, number 16, and on and on and on. Dickie Moore, number 12, on and on and on. A star at every position. Prime. And I remember thinking to myself, we're in a lot of trouble. Unless the Gump can play a shutout tonight, we're losers. We can't score on Plante. There's no way. You know, Plante was unbeatable. I remember when Jacques came to the Rangers, he was traded for Worsley. It was a monumental deal that they made. And Jacques came to the Rangers, and he was playing very well for a while. And he was an older guy. He was like in his mid-30s. And I went up to him and I said, Jacques, how come you're playing so good? You're old. You should be slowing down. He said, well, I have. He said, I'm slow and I can't get out of the way of the puck. And I thought, what a brilliant comeback. What a great line. Thank you, Mr. Plante. I'll use that, you know.
That is a great line, yeah. And, you know, when you think about it, these two guys, these two goalies, face off, to use the hockey term, against each other quite often. and they did it without masks. They did it without helmets. You know, they were just there in the net
for a while, and then there's the story of Jacques Plante and the story of how his mask got in Hal Bach's garage. Hal?
Oh yeah.
Oh.
That's right. I
Do tell.
I will tell you the story. Jacques was an entrepreneur. He knew that he couldn't play hockey forever, so he was looking for a post-hockey career. Sadly, he died young, so he didn't have much of a post-hockey life. But he was an entrepreneur, and he came up with. He was the first modern goalie to use a mask, and I'll tell that story in a moment. And he decided he would manufacture masks, Jacques Plante model masks. My son, the lawyer, decided he wanted to play hockey when he was a kid. Instead of Little League baseball, he wanted to play Little League hockey. Okay. What position would you like to play, Richard? I want to be a goaltender. Now, the reason for that is he didn't have to skate up and down the ice. He could just plant himself in front of the net. Okay, you want to be a goalie? We got to get you a mask. Oh, wait, Jacques Plante just started a mask company. I'll order a mask for you from Jacques Plante. And we did. We ordered a mask. I don't remember how much it cost, but I had the sales receipt was number 2. I don't know who bought the first one, but I got the second one. And that mask resides in my garage as a memory, a memento of my son's hockey career as a kid playing squirt hockey and not junior hockey, but squirt hockey.
The equivalent of like Little League
stuff.
Yeah.
He had a great time. He played from the time he was 7 years old until the time he was about 13, 14 years old. And
how did he ever skate on top of Madison Square Garden?
No,
garden?
He was never up there. He skated at a place called Skateland, where the Rangers practiced for a while here in New Hyde Park, right close to where I lived. And we would play games at all kinds of strange hours, and we went and he played. He had a lot of fun, and we went on some road trips. We went to Cape Cod, we went to Buffalo, we went to Philadelphia. So he had a lot of fun doing that, and then he remembers it warmly, and I remember it warmly.
Wow. You know what a segue this is? It's incredible. The Philadelphia man is here to talk a little bit of his hockey, and I'd like to introduce the man, the myth, the legend, George Case III.
Hey, well, I appreciate that, Ralph. I'm really sort of out of my element. I'm enjoying listening to this about hockey, but my memories of hockey in the Philadelphia area were the Flyers, and they were called the Broad Street Bullies, and they won 2 Stanley Cups, I think 73-74 and 75-76, and they had some great players, and you're talking about one of the greatest goaltenders was Bernie Parent, and I'm not sure. Hal, do you know, did that mask of Jacques Plante, did that get marketed? I mean, did it get picked up by a company like a Bauer or somebody, and all the guys are wearing that?
I'm not aware of that, George, but I'll tell the story of how the mask came into play in the first place. The Rangers were playing the Canadiens in the Garden, I think it was in 1959. And no goalie wore a mask in those days. Everybody was barefaced, But Jacques was fooling with a mask in practice, and it was considered to be almost cowardly for a goalie to put on a mask.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's in goal this night, and Andy Bathgate, the great Andy Bathgate, who was a friend of mine, we lost him a few years ago. Bathgate launched a slap shot, and it cracked right into Jacques' face, hit him right in the face, blood gushing all over the place. And so he goes into the locker room. Now, Jacques Plante was at the top of his game in those days. He was the best goalie in the league by far. Now, he goes in the locker room, and they stitch him up. And Toe Blake was the coach, and he was an old line hockey guy, tough guy. And he said, okay, get back out there. And Jacques says, I'm not going out without the mask. And now Toe Blake is faced with a dilemma. Because in those days, they did not carry 2 goalies. They only had 1 goalie. And if a goalie was hurt and couldn't play anymore, the home team would supply what they called an emergency goalie. Now, this came into play recently when a Zamboni driver up in Toronto wound up in the nets for the Carolina team because both their goalies got hurt. So anyway, the backup goalie in Madison Square Garden in those days was a guy named Joe Schaefer. He was a statistician.
That name really
the choice for Toe Blake was this. Do I let Plant go out with the mask, or do I use Joe Schaefer? Well, he said to himself, I got to bite the bullet, and I got to let Jock wear the mask. And that's how Jock Plant showed up in goal, the first time a modern NHL goalie showed up on the ice with a mask. It was a result of Andy Bathgate's slap shot and Toe Blake's desire to win a game and not take a chance on some statistician standing in front of the net. So that's that story. And,
now, let me ask you this. I'm curious because of the equipment situation with Major League Baseball, but hockey for a long time, like you're talking about, no helmets, no, the goalies
and no teeth.
Right.
If
If Plant was the first goalie to wear a mask, did that then follow? Was there some kind of an NHL rule that was passed that the goalies had to wear a mask and the players had to wear helmets?
No, it was optional.
Okay.
And players started to wear helmets about a year or two later, and it became eventually it became a rule that you had to wear a helmet.
Right.
But they did grandfather it, and there were players who were in the league who had been in the league without the helmet, who were allowed to complete their careers without helmets if that's what they chose.
It was like a grandfather clause, right?
Yeah.
Many of them did. But
I
the helmet changed the game. The helmet changed the game.
The Olympics team, the 1980 Olympics team, I thought was one of the prime moves of moving that idea of a helmet and a mask into the NHL because they did have to wear them in Olympic hockey.
That's true. But the helmet changed the nature of the game in some ways, and actually. George mentioning the Broad Street Bullies brings that to mind as well. When the guys had helmets on, the tendency was to use the stick more freely because they were protected. The helmet protected your head. In the old days, they were not so quick to swing a stick because you could hurt a guy. Bernie Geoffrion broke a Ranger player's jaw, Ron Murphy's jaw, swung a stick at him, because he had lost his temper and they hit him in the face and broke his jaw. But so they were less likely to do that in the helmetless days. Once the helmet came in, the sticks came up, I think, and the Broad Street Bullies were famous for having their sticks high.
Right.
And they changed the face of the game in many ways, not necessarily for the better. But they did.
Well, that was the reason I mentioned that, the Broad Street Bullies. I mean, that's the one thing I remember getting interested in hockey because living in this area, they had a tremendous reputation of really being tough guys on the ice, and they came up with that name, Broad Street Bullies, because they were willing to take on anybody, and like you're saying, Hal, if they all got helmets on now. It might be a little bit of a different animal, but the fact is that they had some really tough players. And my recollection of hockey dated back into the 50s, I guess, when there were only 6 teams. And Philadelphia wasn't even in that original 6. I mean,
right.
It was the Northeast, it was the Bruins and the Rangers and the Blackhawks and Chicago, Detroit, Toronto and Montreal. That was the 6 teams in the NHL.
Exactly. In fact, tomorrow night I'll be on George Grimm's podcast called Retro Rangers, and this discussion is going to be the feud between the Bruins and the Rangers because those two teams were always battling for the 4th playoff spot. The league had 6 teams, and there were 4 playoff spots. And generally speaking, the playoff teams were Chicago, Detroit, Montreal, and Toronto. And if one of those teams were faltering, then the Bruins and the Boston Bruins and the Rangers had a chance for the fourth playoff spot. But the unique thing about those days, and I pride myself on being what I call a six-team writer, means I covered the league when there were only six teams. That shows you how old I am. The unique thing was they never changed. The rosters never changed. There might be a rookie or two added every year, and an old guy might phase out. But by and large, the teams never changed. So you knew exactly what to expect. I said before, I told you the numbers, because I remember them like it was yesterday, of the Canadians. The same team every year. And they would win the Stanley Cup very often. I mean, Henri Richard, 11 Stanley Cups. So that's a major difference in the league. Now, of course, the other difference is there's 32 teams in the league, and it's impossible to keep up, very much like baseball. I mean, when I was a kid, there were, 8 teams in each league, 16 major league teams. And I could tell you all the players, and I could give you the lineups for most of the teams. Well, that's changed, and now there are players who hit 20 and 30 home runs, and I had no idea that they had hit 20 and 30 home runs because it's impossible to follow all the players because there are so many teams. And the same thing is true in hockey. I watch a game. I don't watch as many games as I used to. I'll watch a game here and there, and first of all the players seem to be Scandinavian or Russian. There are much fewer Canadian players than there were.
I was going to say, it used to be pretty much all Canadians, right, Hal?
It was all Canadians.
Oh, yeah.
It was a big deal when the Bruins brought in a player named Tom Williams, who was an American. He was the first American, and, boy, they made a big fuss about that. So it's changed completely. I mean, it's just completely changed. And I marvel at the broadcasters who are able to keep up with the players and with their names and the pronunciations. I don't know if the game. I think the game has changed. I think the game is a little faster now than it was.
Oh yes.
In those days.
Like in baseball.
Is the game integrated? Excuse my ignorance, but I'm just not into it anymore.
Not really. I don't. Hal, I don't think so. I mean,
the Flyers do have one black skater.
Yeah, that's about as much as any team in the league. Right. I think there are a couple of other. The Capitals have had a couple of black players that haven't lasted all that long. And they were not bad players, but for some reason they didn't hang around. But I think, that might have been just a way of sort of trying to increase the African-American attendance at these games because I don't think...
From 1 to 2.
From 1 to 2,
well, the other thing,
and that was the parents of the guy who was playing.
Right. In New York, when I worked for the Rangers, the sellout crowd, and we sold out every game, the sellout crowd was 15,925. And the joke was... there are 15,925 hockey fans here in New York, and they all come every night to the Ranger games. But that's all the fans we had. Well, I don't know that was true, but that's what that was the thing that we used to get teased with, that you don't have that much of a fan base. You just have these hard and fast fans who will come every night, no matter what, and nobody else.
They were the old Ranger fans. Hal, gosh, they were rabid. I mean, you talk about the old Dodgers and the Giants. The old Ranger fans, in fact, many of them were actually Dodger fans at the same time when both teams were in the city. And boy, they could give any Dodger fan, a run for his money in terms of fan support. Because they were really strong. My goal as a kid was to join the Rangers fan club and go on their annual train trip up to Boston to play. Well, that never happened, but I did get to go to a Boston Bruins Rangers game at the old Boston Garden when I was in grad school up there. And my old rooting instincts for the Rangers came to the fore, and I got booed right around my. With the
I was going to say, did you make it? I guess you made it out alive there, right, David?
Oh, I was out of line, and the funny thing was the old Boston Garden looked exactly like the old Madison Square Garden. So for a few minutes there, I thought I was, back home on home ice, so to speak. And when I started to cheer the Rangers, I heard it from the fans around me.
Well, the Boston Garden was like one of the original arenas that they played in. Now, I was dispatched to cover the Stanley Cup playoffs, the Stanley Cup finals between the St. Louis Blues and the Boston Bruins. I think it was 1970. And there's a great picture of Bobby Orr scoring the winning goal. He's scored the goal against Glenn Hall, and he's up in the air. He got pitchforked by Noel Picard, who got his stick between his legs and just lifted him up in the air. And Orr still scored the goal. It's a very famous hockey picture. And now the Stanley Cup belongs to the Bruins, and they're celebrating, and it's a wonderful moment. Blah blah blah, And I'm in the press box, and I'm writing, and I'm working, and I'm working, and I'm writing. And when you're working for the Associated Press, often you're the last guy in the press box because there's a lot of work to be done. And I was the last guy in the press box. And I'm working and I'm writing. And I look over to my right. Now, remember, this building has been built like in the 1920s, right? And it's 50 years old. And I look over to my right, and I see, staring at me with very beady eyes, a rat, a giant rat. And I'm thinking, oh, please, God, don't make the rat come over here. I need to finish my work. And that memory is stuck in my mind. 1970, how many years ago? 50 years ago, right?
Yeah, well, Hal, if the old Boston Garden, which was like the old Madison Square Garden, that rat probably died of lung cancer because of the smoke up there.
Cigarette smoke. You're right, cigar smoke.
Oh God, it was awful. Yeah,
you were right about that.
And if you weren't smelling that, you were smelling the circus.
Yep, that too.
That was a distinct odor that I remember about the garden.
The garden
was a great old building.
It was.
I loved Madison Square Garden, and I don't think the new, it's not new anymore, but the replacement garden left a lot to be desired when you compare it to the old garden, in my opinion.
I'm sorry I've never been to the new garden, but the old garden is still very fresh in my mind. And I was going to ask you, Ralph, do you remember when the circus would come to town and play Madison Square Garden, that they used to have what was called in those days a freak show down?
Oh, yeah, that's how my mother got me. I came very cheap, and
yeah, I mean, they had a freak show down below the garden floor there in the whatever they called it, and they had I remember distinctly the fat lady and this guy who was like 8'4", and he would sell these plastic rings that would fit around his finger. But you could get at least 3 or 4 fingers in the ring, and he would put it on each time.
I remember a tattooed or hairy woman.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it was, everybody went down there. I think it was free. I don't think you had to pay a separate admission. But, nobody in those days thought, what a pitiful thing to do.
Oh, absolutely.
How awful to literally make freaks of these people. There's an old movie called Freaks. I don't know if you've ever seen it, which starred, quote unquote, freaks from a bunch of, I think, European circuses, and it was about a love affair between this midget and, excuse me, and it's pretty much a grotesque movie to watch, and it's hard to watch. I've seen it only about 2 or 3 times. But
I need to change the subject for a moment.
Okay.
Before we leave the air tonight, I need to know what Hubler was doing posing for a picture with Roger Stone.
You saw that as well, right, Hal? I saw it.
Yes, I did. The
original
Odd Couple.
Come on, David.
Yeah,
Come on, David. Fess up. What was the deal?
All right. Well, the friendship began a good number of years ago between my wife and Roger's wife. They met at the gym and they hit it off. And Roger did not have the notoriety that he does these days, but he was still a bit of a character. Personally, he's a really pleasant guy to be around. I got to tell you, he's sort of like an old style. What would you call him? The guys are just. Well, a huckster, yes, in one sense, but also, he's a very flamboyant dresser. He knows his way around the bartending world. He's one of the. I love his chocolate martinis. You can't beat that. In fact, when they were over the house before we went to dinner that night, I went out and got all the ingredients, and we all had chocolate martinis. We don't talk politics, and we have and he knows how I feel, and I know, of course, how he feels. But at bottom, the reason I find him pleasurable in a social setting is that he and his wife are incredibly generous people. They literally take in strays, and I'm not talking about dogs or cats. I'm talking about people that have been down on their ass. They'll give them jobs as drivers and things, and he did that when they lived here in Washington, and I know he's done it back down there. And I mean, but his Achilles heel is that he doesn't know when to stop. He'll get in trouble. Yeah, I mean, but no. The interesting thing about him, he does not have a college education, but he's incredibly bright, and he makes perfectly good sense in these 30-second sound bites. I wish all politicians were that quick, you know. So anyway, that's the genesis of the friendship. And
let me just say this to you, pal.
Yeah.
And you are my pal. You be careful how many of those chocolate martinis you drink, because you'll wind up with a picture of Trump on your back.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I tell you a quick story. We stayed they had an apartment on Central Park South, in the same building where Mickey Mantle had his restaurant, you know. And the first time we went there to stay for the weekend, the apartment was filled with pictures of Trump. I mean, of Trump, all over the place. Donald Trump and Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon's pictures were all over, in various, with him, without him, all these things. So when I saw Roger afterwards, I said, I just had to cover all those pictures with sheets and things. I said, it looked like I was sitting shiver in the house.
Well, it's nice. It's nice that you came clean, David. Because that was troubling me for several weeks when I saw that picture.
Is he writing his own pardon, or is he having someone else do it?
Well, I've actually written a couple of chapters for a book or two of his, not getting it for credit, but for money.
Oh, really?
And I'll tell you why I did it. It was a test for me to see, because the subjects, like one was about Pat Nixon, and their early relationship, and how he pursued her, and she kept saying no, and to get married. And I thought, well, I have to put aside my own political leanings and feelings to see if I could do this with an objective eye. And so it was like a test for me to see if I could stay, focused on the facts and not veer off into, the political aspect of it, which I think I did. I mean, that was a kind of interesting chapter that I wrote in that particular book. And then there was another one that I worked on too that also involved legitimate findings from the Warren Commission on the Kennedy assassination, And so the things I've written for him are not, I don't believe, politically influenced by the current, current events or anything.
How accurate was the Warren Commission, David?
Oh, please don't get me started. I don't even. Many people believe it, and many people don't. I mean, you have to believe that a bullet can change course in somebody's body. And if you believe that, then you believe the Warren Commission.
Okay.
Because the bullet that struck him traveled not in a straight line, but
weird positions.
Yeah. So yeah.
Get through the governor's hand, all that stuff.
Yeah. So but they'll never find out anything further on that. That's old news.
Well, weren't they to have released some of that information or about?
Yeah, they released plenty of it. That's how I was able to at least write this particular it wasn't a full chapter that time. It was just a portion. But yeah, I mean, most of that stuff is in the public domain.
For a while there, one of the prime suspects was George Case III sitting in the Washington dugout that day.
No, I'm innocent of that one. Thank you, Ralph. That was a little bit before.
It wasn't me who brought it up.
Well, I
was going to tell David. David, you sound like who was it? The guy was the district attorney and was it Jim Garrison who came up with the whole theory about the assassination?
Yes, right. Yes, that's right. That
Louisiana.
Was his name, Texas.
No, he was Louisiana.
Texas. Was he?
Louisiana.
Okay.
Played by Kevin Costner in the movie.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Which brings us around to Costner in baseball. So I just wanted to mention that. So.
He apparently played semi-pro or low
yeah, he
level.
did. He played college ball in Los Angeles at Fullerton State College, and so that's one of the reasons I really enjoy Costner's movies that are sports oriented, because he actually played. And you can see, his ability as a ball player come through, because he knew how to act and he knew how to talk to people about what angles and what they wanted to do as ball players, which, brings me to another subject that I don't like about a lot of sports movies, is because they're not realistic. But Costner's portrayal in Field of Dreams and his portrayal in Bull Durham, and especially his portrayal in For Love of the Game as a pitcher with the Detroit Tigers, I thought was outstanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those movies, they were realistic, and I think we've talked about that before, that I've never been able to really get into those movies where the teams have artificial names.
Right.
But fortunately, the Durham Bulls were the Durham Bulls, and Cleveland was Cleveland in that.
Right.
It's funny you should mention that, because just the other night I was testing my DVR to see if it still worked, and I put in 61 just to see. And you talk about, even though it was filmed at Briggs Stadium for the most part.
Right.
The helmets, the way their helmets were, the Yankees helmets.
Well, but the actors, they looked like those guys, with the exception of the guy who played Yogi Berra. They all looked, even down to Bill Skowron looked a good deal like Skowron. But the Mantle character and the Maris character, they nailed it. They were them,
Yeah.
Hey, I agree, David. I agree with all that, and this brings us back to where we started this discussion about hockey. I just wanted to mention, maybe you guys don't have the same feeling that I had, but the film that I really enjoyed, sports film, was Miracle, and the fact it was all about the 1980 Olympics, and it was so well done. I thought they had actors who actually could skate. And they had Kurt Russell did a tremendous job as his portrayal of Brooks, Herb Brooks. And they had wonderful editing. They took clips of the actual game in 1980 against the Russians, interspersed that with the storyline, and with guys who were skaters, but they were actors at the same time. And I just thought it was terrific. I mean, I really enjoyed that movie because I'm with you, David. I get not real happy with a lot of sports movies that are not realistic. But to me, that one was great.
Jimmy Pearsall, Tony Perkins, and Jimmy Pearsall.
Well, that's one, Ralph. I didn't even want to bring that up, but to me, that was just a travesty. That's one of the worst casting jobs I've ever seen in my life.
Or Gary Cooper.
I happen to know. I mean, I happen to know Pearsall. Yeah, well, that was another one. I mean, I happen to know Pearsall, and the fact is that Tony Perkins was so far removed from Pearsall as an athlete. Hey, Perkins is a great actor. Same thing with Lou Gehrig and Gary Cooper. I mean, Cooper is a tremendous actor, but he was right-handed playing the left-handed immortal Lou Gehrig. I mean, that's a Hollywood touch that I just hate that kind of stuff. And, you know, it's my personal bias, but I don't get all excited about those movies. And even people talk about, well, wasn't The Natural a great movie? Yeah, it was a real story. I mean, true story supposedly about Eddie Wakus. But in all of my life around baseball, I've never seen anybody hit a ball that knocked the lights and exploded them out of a light.
Right. You're 100% on target. I felt the same way about that movie.
I did too. And the New York Knights. Never heard of them. You know? By the way, I must ask before we go. I have to ask Hal a question. When we just raised the issue of the 1980 Miracle on Ice team, I just read an article about one of the players there, and the name was familiar as soon as I saw it, who was in really deep trouble.
Mark Pavlich. Mark Pavlich, right?
I guess that's who it was.
He played for the Rangers for a while, and is in fact one of three Rangers. Now it's three. There had been two who scored 5 goals in a game. He had a pretty good career in the NHL, playing for the Rangers and other teams, but he's in bad shape right now. Apparently, it's like Alzheimer's, dementia, or something.
He's been involved in some criminal activities and
yes. He's in a lot of trouble. He's in a lot of trouble. Or he's been in a lot of trouble.
He still is apparently. Yeah, I was saddened to read that. You think and so many people think that the Americans beat the Russians in the finals, but that was the semifinals.
Right.
Semifinals. Yeah, they had to beat Finland the next day.
Right.
Yeah, they had to wind up beating Finland, I think, for the gold medal. Right.
Yeah, which sort of was anticlimactic because after.
Well, you know what it was, but that was whole thing. You know, if you've read a lot, and I really have because I loved that era, even though I wasn't a hockey guy. But the fact is that we were having so many problems as a country, and this was such an uplifting experience for. You know, and I guess that's where the whole chant began, USA, USA.
I think you're right.
And you're, here it is, the Collegians playing against the Red Army, the greatest hockey team in the world, and they wind up winning the game. I mean, it was just an incredible experience, and one that I think Herb Brooks, in his statement, he said, well, we could play the Russians 99 out of 100 times, they'd win. But we only had that one, and we won it, and that was a terrific story.
Yeah, and of course Go ahead, Hal. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The gold medal game against Finland. People forget that after 2 periods, the Americans were trailing 2-1, and they scored 3 goals in the third period to win it, then win the gold medal.
Right.
Whoa.
Yeah, I think, Hal, from what I've read, I guess Herb Brooks really read the riot act to the team, in the rest period between the second and third, say, hey, whatever you guys did against the Russians, it'll all be forgotten if we lose to Finland.
That's right. That's true too. Yeah, the Soviets, of course, were our bitter enemy. In 1980 was still the Cold War era. So beating not only this professional outfit, but this professional outfit from what would later be called the Evil Empire, was a double win, akin to, although it didn't, of course, didn't get the same notoriety, when the American crew team from Washington University beat the Germans in the '36 Olympics.
Right.
That was a great victory for the Americans. Again, it was an amateur team playing against the semi-pro Germans at that time. I don't think they was professional rowing, but they were pretty strong team, and they were winning everything over there.
You mentioned the 36 Olympics. I just did an interview with an old camp buddy of mine, Robert D'Angelo. He was Marty Glickman's son-in-law. I didn't find out.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Find that out till recently. I'm going to get him as a guest on this show because I need help in asking this guy questions.
I loved Marty Glickman. I thought
that was an amazing story because I think Glickman, wasn't he taken off the team by bondage or something?
Sure, because he was Jewish.
Right.
He
didn't want to offend. He didn't want to offend Hitler, so he took him off the team.
Right. Yeah. Well, he was an anti-Semite to begin with, so he was in good company in Germany.
How close stuff today mirrors that. I'm going to close on a good note. I want to pay some homage to the casting directors of all the sports movies ever. Somebody mentioned Bull Durham before. Isn't it amazing that Susan Sarandon looks younger to us every day? as we grow older, we see that movie. She looks very young. Are we getting older or not?
No.
I think, but that was quite a casting there.
Oh, yeah. She was great in that movie.
Great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm going to come up against the three of you. I think The Natural was one of my favorite movies of all time.
Hey, that's fine.
Hey, I think it was a good, Ralph, I think it was a good movie. I just don't appreciate, a Hollywood touch with the exploding light standards. That's all. I understand, Robert Redford, he did a good job and all that kind of stuff, and it was supposedly, an almost true story about the Phillies' Eddie Waitkus. But, it was...
uniforms, the realism of that, the coaches, the manager, I really loved that movie.
Okay.
My favorite baseball movie was Bang the Drum Slowly.
Yes.
With De Niro.
Yeah. Yep.
I thought that was a magnificent movie.
But again, they didn't play justice to the athlete that it would have taken.
Well, you didn't have to be in that movie. It really wasn't a baseball movie on the field story. It was the emotional dealing with a guy who's dying.
Right.
That's
right.
I had a conversation with a fellow by the name of Michael Duca, who's an official scorer. He's one of our podcasters, official scorer with the Giants, wrote a book and what have you. And he talked about which movies are baseball movies and which movies are movies that have baseball in them.
Right.
There's that fine line, and we can do a podcast on that, gentlemen.
Yeah.
But not tonight. We've reached our limit. I really enjoyed this one for a number of reasons. The only thing I feel a little guilty about, have you talked enough about your hockey memories, George Case?
I sure did, Ralph. I mean, like I said, I'm not really a hockey guy, but I have the two things for me, the Broad Street Bullies, the Flyers, and Miracle. I mean, that's a personal preference of mine. And, that Hal and David and you guys are certainly, a lot more versed in hockey than I am. But those two items in hockey really are part of my memory.
Well,
for Hal and me, it's the Old Garden. The Old Garden was my
running
second
up
home.
those stairs, David.
Yep,
those
absolutely.
That's a memory I'll never forget.
Got to be in the first row.
You didn't know how many people were up there who had beaten you from different angles.
Right. And you could fall when you started to race down the stairs. That was dangerous because I'm not kidding. I nearly fell over there one time onto down below because I sort of the momentum was carrying me too quickly. Fortunately, I grabbed onto the railing. But yeah.
Fortunate for us, David.
Thank you. For me too. Yeah.
Thank you,
okay,
gentlemen.
Guys.
George Case
All
III,
right.
David Hubler, and Hal Bach. I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Not a weak link in that one except for me. And we'll be back at you before you know it. Adios, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks. The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.